Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mad Barn Academy. And if you are new here today, then welcome. We hope to earn your subscription today. I'm Dr. Fran Rowe, one of the veterinary nutritionists here at Mad Barn. And today I'm going to be talking about heat stress in horses. With summer in full swing and higher than normal temperatures being reported in many places across North America the past couple weeks, we thought that this would be a great topic to review. So let's get started. So, heat stress is a condition that occurs when the body's ability to thermoregulate or maintain its internal body temperature becomes challenged or even completely fails. As a result, body temperature rises beyond safe levels, which can lead to muscle damage and organ dysfunction if it's not addressed promptly. In severe cases, heat stress can even progress to fulminant heat stroke, which is a life-threatening form of heat-related illness. Horses can develop heat stress during exercise, particularly in hot weather, because they generate a ton of heat from their large muscle mass. They are truly metabolic machines. But they can also become overheated at rest when they're not working, when conditions are right. So there are several mechanisms by which horses thermoregulate. The most important mechanism is evaporative cooling via sweat. So approximately 70% of heat loss during exercise occurs through evaporation under kind of normal ambient conditions. The second most important mechanism is through conduction, or when heat is exchanged along a temperature gradient. A good example of conductive cooling is heat transfer from the skin surface to water, such as when you're hosing down your horse after exercise. The other more minor methods of heat dissipation include infrared radiation and convection. So, as you might expect, there are numerous risk factors for heat stress, some of which are probably pretty intuitive. Factors like coat, exercise, humidity, anhydrosis are sort of easy factors to kind of recognize. But a few factors that might be more surprising include age, body condition, diet, and then the presence of other health conditions. So let's go through each of these and kind of elaborate a little bit more on each of these factors individually. So for age, foals are especially sensitive to heat as they're still developing normal thermoregulatory mechanisms. So it's really important to monitor really young foals when they're out in direct sunlight and making sure that they have the opportunity to seek shade um, and get out of the sun when it's really, really hot. For body condition, horses that are overweight are going to be less heat tolerant because fat is more insulating. Kind of along the same vein, we have a coat. So horses with thick hair coats, such as senior horses with Cushing's disease, or even horses that may be blanketed when it suddenly becomes really hot outside, are going to have a harder time thermoregulating just due to all that extra insulation. So next is diet, and diet can impact heat tolerance, particularly diets really high in protein. So the digestive process of protein produces a lot of heat. So horses in hot climates on high protein diets may struggle to stay cool, especially if some of these other risk factors are also at play. Now, for health conditions, we have a couple different scenarios that can impact a horse's heat tolerance. So, certainly, any illness that causes a fever is going to increase the risk of overheating if that horse is febrile and, you know, living in a really hot climate at that time. But other conditions like respiratory disease and anhidrosis can really increase the risk for heat stress. Even though heat dissipation through that respiratory process is a fairly minor mechanism in horses with regards to thermoregulation, it still compromises that horse's ability to maintain its body temperature. Now, with regards to anhidrosis, this is going to be a little bit more intuitive. So horses with anhidrosis have an inability to sweat, or they have decreased sweating and or maybe no sweating at all. So we had already mentioned that sweating is the primary mechanism by which horses thermoregulate. So if that mechanism is severely compromised, they're not going to be able to sweat, they're not going to be able to cool down as effectively. So next is exercise. Horses generate a lot of heat during exercise. High intensity or long duration exercise, particularly in hot conditions, can lead to dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and those things can further increase the risk of overheating. Now, lastly on our list is humidity. So humidity plays a really big role in the body's ability to effectively cool down. High humidity, or when there's a lot of moisture in the air, prevents evaporation of sweat. So that major mechanism for thermoregulation becomes severely challenged. So the clinical signs consistent with overheating in horses fall a bit on a sliding scale. You can have more mild signs of overheating that are going to be more consistent with a heat stress. That can progress all the way to more severe signs that are going to be consistent with a fulminant heat stroke. So even though heat stress is a more mild heat-related illness or type of overheating, it's still serious and it definitely warrants intervention. But the good news is that most horses will recover just fine once you institute cooling measures. And we'll talk about those cooling measures on the next slide. But some things you might notice if your horse is starting to overheat or struggle with the hot weather conditions that you're in are going to include abnormal vital signs. So heart rate, respiratory rate, and rectal temperature are all going to be elevated. And it's going to be notable because that horse is going to be at rest and not doing anything, and they're kind of huffing and puffing and panting. Their heart rate's going to be a little elevated, their temperature is going to be a little elevated. Or you've finished exercise, you're cooling out, and they're just struggling to kind of recover from that bout of exercise in hot weather. Other things to look for are going to include signs of dehydration, so tacky mucous membranes, maybe some sunken eyes, maybe a delayed skin pinch over the shoulder. Another one is excessive sweating, especially if it's really humid outside. So we had talked about that humidity decreases the effectiveness of sweat or the sweat's ability to kind of evaporate and cool the body down. So the body sweats more, trying to compensate for that. So sometimes in these really humid conditions after exercise, these horses will be kind of sweating really excessively. And then a couple of other things to look for would be, kind of a dull attitude, some lethargy, signs of exhaustion, and then unwillingness to eat or uninterested in eating. So heat stroke is a more serious heat-related condition, and it can be life-threatening. If your horse's signs of overheating are this severe, you should institute cooling measures as immediately as possible and call your veterinarian for help. But you're going to be noticing really severely abnormal vital signs, so that heart rate, respiratory rate, and rectal temperature are going to be way elevated. That horse may be showing you signs of stumbling, incoordination, reluctance to move at all. They may be kind of acting agitated, showing some signs of distress that might even look kind of colicky. And then, certainly, in really severe cases, those horses can collapse, become recumbent, and even die. So, if your horse is showing signs of heat stress, we recommend instituting the following cooling measures. And you can follow this handy acronym SHADE. So, first, you're going to want to stop whatever exercise you're doing and remove as much tack as possible. And you'll want to move to a cool or shaded area if that's available. Offer your horse water for drinking, even though they may not initially be very interested in drinking. It's important to have that option available to them. You're going to want to hose off with water kind of continuously, and if at all possible, apply a fan to that horse as well. These are kind of our two most effective cooling methods to help this horse cool down as quickly as possible. And you're going to want to continue these cooling measures until your horse's temperature and their other vital signs begin to stabilize. Now, if your horse's signs of heat stress worsen or do not improve within 20 minutes of you starting to work on cooling them down, go ahead and call your veterinarian for assistance. Avoiding the heat really isn't possible this time of year, especially for those of us who are living in the hotter, drier, or more humid climates. But let's go ahead and cover some of the precautions that you can take to help your horse manage the heat and reduce the risk of overheating. First, we can talk about some dietary changes to consider. The first is going to be focusing on hydration. So, adding extra salt or electrolytes to your horse's meals is going to replenish any electrolyte losses from sweat, but it's also going to encourage them to drink and maintain good hydration. You can also soak meals to help increase water intake as well. So, mashing your grain meals, adding a meal of soaked beet pulp or forage cubes, something like that. We can also look at potentially reducing the amount of protein in the diet, especially if the horse is on kind of a high protein diet already, such as a lot of alfalfa or other high protein feeds. So we certainly want to ensure that that horse is receiving adequate protein intake, but we'll be looking to kind of limit any excessive intake. And this is especially true for any mature horses that are, at maintenance or very light work. And then lastly, if you have a horse that's a little bit of a chunky monkey, instituting a weight loss diet can be really helpful for helping these horses improve their heat tolerance in hot climates. So some other prevention strategies to reduce the risk of overheating include reducing activity. So we'll be looking to modify our exercise routine or even avoiding forced exercise on those particularly hot and humid days. And we like to recommend utilizing heat index as a guide for kind of helping you figure out what your exercise plan is going to look like day to day in the summer. Second is going to be, as much as possible, instituting cooling measures. So utilizing fans and ensuring those horses have access to shady areas when they're turned outside so that they can get out of the direct sun. Certainly, if applicable, body clipping anybody who is still shaggy or has kind of that thicker, fuller hair coat, especially if they're kind of new to a hot or humid climate. If they've relocated to that area, can take time to acclimate to new climates. And that kind of transitions us into this fourth point here about travel and acclimatization in new climates. So certainly monitoring horses closely during trailering and just making sure that they're eating and drinking well during that time on the trailer. And then just remembering that it can take several weeks for horses to acclimate to a new client. So if you're traveling for shows, especially if you're traveling down south where it's going to be hotter, just recognize that if the horse isn't used to that, it can affect them. All right, so as I mentioned, in conjunction with modifying exercise, we recommend monitoring heat index as a way to kind of guide your decisions about when or how hard to exercise in hot weather. So the heat index is a measure of how hot it feels outside by factoring relative humidity into the actual air temperature. This measure actually provides a better estimation of the risk of overheating compared to just temperature alone, because humidity makes it harder for the body to cool itself down. So we have a heat index tool on our website, which allows you to determine the heat index for your location in real time. There's a link here on this slide. I've also included a link in the description below. We have provided a breakdown of kind of how cautious you should be in different humidity conditions. So basically, once the heat index reaches about 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius, you should exercise caution and modify your exercise plan. If the heat index goes above 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius, forced activity should be avoided. Here's another visualization of our heat index recommendation. Both this one and the summary chart on the previous slide are available in that blog article that I've linked in the description below. Alrighty, you guys, here are references for today. And thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and explore the other videos on our channel. We have new content coming out all the time. And be sure to check out the additional links I've provided in the description below if you want to use our heat index tool. I've also linked another article on heat stress in horses as well. All right, thanks so much. Until next time.